Hi, my name is Brian, and if you follow me on Instagram, which if you don't, please do because I do have a lot of things that I post there that I don't here, you probably saw my post about bringing your own voice and your own personality into a rather boring beat. And keeping on the subject of finding your own voice and your own personality as a composer and producer, I find that one of the best ways to do so is by creating your own instrument. Now, I don't mean actually building your own instrument unless you have the tools and knowledge to do so, in which case, yes, do that, that's awesome. I'm talking about sampling yourself, thus creating your own instrument. Now, I've been sampling and using my own instruments for a few years now, and I truly believe that making your own instruments poses a lot of advantages over using a sample library. One, it's free, or at the very least, it's a lot cheaper than buying a new virtual instrument every time that you need a new one. Two, it makes you stand out. Instead of using a run-of-the-mill, widely available Kontakt library that everyone has access to, by creating your own instrument, you're the only one that has that sound, and that sound instantly becomes your voice. Three, it's a rewarding and inspiring process that almost always guarantees to spark muse and inspiration before, during, and after the process. And so today I'm going to go over the basics of how to sample your own instrument, and while doing that, I'm going to be building an instrument for myself. The first thing when creating your own instrument is try thinking outside the box. Since I don't possess the knowledge nor the experience to create a realistic sounding sampled instrument, I'm going to compensate with a unique sounding sampled instrument. And so today I'm going to be sampling my $60 ukulele, but instead of sampling it one note at a time, I'm going to be sampling it using a tremolo technique. Which leads me to my next note. Step out of your comfort zone. I can't play the violin, but I sure do have one, and I can kind of use a bow. Kinda. And so I sampled myself botch playing the violin every minor third note, and the result was, well, listen. Pretty cool, right? These little imperfections, those small or big inconsistencies in the sound, result in a much more organic, interesting, and sometimes realistic sounding instrument. The third and final note is patience. The sampling stage is long, boring, and tedious, and the editing, arranging, setting everything up is even longer. And by the end of the day, you might end up with an instrument that either sounds fantastic or could sound okay at best. But much like practicing any new skill, it takes time to master, and with each micro failure, we learn and adjust the next time that we do it. So let's get to sampling. Since I'm making a multi-sampled instrument, I want to have as much consistency as I can throughout all of the notes, and a good way that I found to achieve this is by using a metronome while I record. Even if I'm not trying to follow the metronome or make a time-based instrument, just having a metronome in my ear while I record the samples, I find that it's making everything sound a little more cohesive. In my case, I'm going to sample each note twice and then pan them left and right to get a really big sounding pad. If I wanted to add 2 or more velocities for each note, I would have to do that for each side. Makes it a lot longer to sample. Luckily, I don't have to do that, but that does make a good point. Plan ahead before you start sampling, because you don't want to get to the setting up process and realize that you're missing samples or notes or velocities, round robins, what have you. It's a complete nightmare. Okay, here we go.
One eternity later.
Okay, so we're done with sampling. Now it's time to edit everything and make everything sound nice and consistent throughout all of the samples, and then export it into individual notes before we can import them back into our sampler. So let's jump right into Cubase, and as you can see, we have all of my individual note recordings, each with stereo, and you can see how inconsistent everything is, which I as I said before, I just love this. I think it adds so much more personality to your samples. So the first thing that I want to do when editing the samples is actually listen to the start of the sample, which sounds pretty right to me. I can move this around in order to make it sit right with the samples, but like I said, I like those inconsistencies, so I want to keep with that approach throughout everything. I don't want it to be messy, but I want it to feel organic, right? So this sounds about right. Let's create just a little fade so we won't have any clicks. And then overall, in terms of stereo, this kind of sounds balanced to me. Sometimes the left track is a little bit louder, but I think this is adding to the personality. And then the end of the sample. Perfect. So let's just cut it right there. Add a little fade, and then just for keeping everything nice and organized, because we are dealing with quite a bit of samples. I mean, this is being conservative. Some instruments have a bigger range than a ukulele, and then you have so many more samples. So I'm just gonna add a cycle marker and then call it C3, because I know this is C3. Always have a little sine wave to check which note I'm actually listening to. And then we can go forward to the next note. So this one kind of starts a little inconsistent, and then it's a judgment call, how you want the instrument to react. You can edit some later in your sampler, but the more close you get it to a finished product in your edits, the easier it's going to be when you're actually building the instrument in your sampler in the next step. So I'm just gonna, since this is a pad, I don't mind having kind of a gentle start to the sample. Maybe just a little quick, yeah, faster attack. That's good. Stereo balance is good. Keep in mind, these are two separate takes, so I can be kind of loud on the one take, and then on the second note, I can be a little quieter. Also, when I moved up in the register of the ukulele, I would play one note on the lower string of the ukulele and then the other on the higher string of the ukulele. So I get different timbres, and again, widening that stereo field in my use case. Awesome. Fade out, and yeah, I'm just gonna speed ramp the whole process while you see me do this so you won't get super bored, but I'm going to do basically the same for the rest of the samples, and I'll see you when I'm done. All right, I think we're done. I think we're good with editing. So as you can see, all the notes, all the individual samples are nicely cross-faded and organized, and the markers are labeled correctly. As you can see, I had to do some crossfade sometimes just to get some notes ending together, but you can't really hear the crossfade. Right, I think it's sounding pretty good. I can't wait to see how this sounds in a polyphonic environment. I'm really curious to see how this turned out. So right now I'm just looking at the levels, and most of them look pretty consistent. This one looks kinda louder, maybe these two as well. Yeah, so maybe I'll just bring those down a little bit. I'm actually just eyeballing it. Maybe these two, just to keep everything consistent. And then since this is kind of quiet, you know what, let's take this down as well. And then since now they're pretty much even, maybe we can bring this a touch. So now we can bring everything up so it'll be nice and consistent. So as far as processing, you can leave it dry, which I think that's what I'm going to do, because you can add effects in your sampler. That's the next step, you'll see. But I do want to roll off some of the low, just the subs, because I mean, in this instrument, you don't really need them. Yeah, we're not missing anything down there. Yeah, anything below there is kind of dead anyway. We can take it maybe just a notch down. Yeah, sounds good to me. As far as naming your files, this is something that I didn't actually know, and I wish someone told me before, because that would have saved me a lot of headaches when I was trying to create my first instruments. The notes go A to G, but the octaves, they shift from C to C, which sounds really counterintuitive and not how you would think. So my first instrument, I would do A2 through G2, and then I would switch to A3. But in fact, if you start on an A, it's gonna be A3, B3, C4. So you actually change the octave number on each C. And so, as you can see, we have C3, D3, E3, F sharp 3, G3, A3, A sharp 3, and then once we get to C, it's C4. When I didn't know that and I mislabeled octaves, I would get octave shifts, and it's a headache to calculate. If this is lower, then I need to move it up an octave or down an octave, and it was a whole mess. So just a little thing to keep in mind. So now that we have everything kind of set up and looking nice, I like the way that this sounds actually. So I think now I'm just going to select each sample, export it individually. And then once I'm done, we're going to import it into Kontakt. And yeah, we're going to build our instrument.
A few moments later.
Okay, so here we are in Kontakt, and the first thing that you want to do is to find the folder that you exported your sounds to, your samples to, in the Kontakt browser. You can't actually drag those from Finder because Kontakt disappears and you can't drag those into it from Finder. So unfortunately, you have to use this old looking browser inside of Kontakt and find your samples. Once you did that, what you want to do is to click this little floppy disk, #millennials, and then select new instrument and then hit the edit button. Once we have that, mapping editor, and then we have our layout. So now you want to actually start dragging things into this mapping editor depending on how you labeled your samples. So if I drag this A sharp 3 into our mapping editor, you can see that it stretches across a few notes, and that's because you can actually change how far it's going to stretch that sample across the notes. So if you just move your mouse up, it'll stretch it up until 1 octave, and then it's going to go for your whole keyboard. So we actually want to aim for 2 semitones, just because the way that we sampled it, and then A sharp 3. Here we go, perfect. Okay, so now we just need to keep on dragging stuff to the correct position. If you misdid that, you can always use the drag option to change it to be perfect. C4, G sharp 4. Now, I think we're ready to play something. So pretty. Now, I want more range in this, so what? Now after I laid my C3 down, I can actually stretch it back. So let's go 2 octave, because who cares, you know? It's a pad, it's going to sound amazing. So ominous! I can base a whole score off of just this. Oh! So good. And of course we want more range after this. I find that if you go too high, it starts to sound a little tape machine-y. I don't really like this, so let's limit ourselves just a little bit. I think that can be enough. Woo! Where's my sustain pedal? That's so pretty. Okay, well, at this point, you're pretty much done. But, I mean, we want to give it some more playing personality, right? And so, if you want to change our envelope, if we want to get a little more release, well, it's already mapped for us. So just raise the release. Here we go, a little more. We can get a lot. Depending on how you want your instrument to interact with your playing, right? I think is about enough. This is perfect. What can we do next? Well, as we know, our samples, they start and they end and they cut off, and we want everything to loop. So how do we do that? So let's go to our C3 node and double click that. That opens up our wave editor, but it closes the mapping editor, which is a little annoying because I want to edit a lot. So let's just open it up again. And then we have both the mapping editor and then we have our wave editor. And what we want to do is sample loop, but we don't want to actually hit this activation button. We want to hit this one, because for some reason, this kind of slices it into a few loops, and we don't want that. We just want regular loops. So we activate it right here. And then what I usually do is search for a transient that is very obvious, and then in our loop end, try to find another pretty obvious transient. And most likely they're going to blend really nice, but just for good measure, we're going to crossfade this quite a bit. It's a pad, so there's a lot of wiggle room there. And so now, once it reaches this point, it's going to loop very smoothly. Nice! Can hold this node indefinitely. Awesome. Let's do the same for all the rest of the nodes. Just, well, no, now we drag the sample start, which is another thing that you can do. If you don't like a sample start, you can actually start with a little more attack. Middle of the sample? Yeah, why not? So let's go sample start, search for the first transient that I think is a good loop point, search for another transient. This looks kind of promising. Yeah, fade in. Good to go. Next. So I'm going to do this for the whole thing, and once I'm done, I'm going to show you what's our next step.
2,000 years later.
All right, we're back. Everything is nice and looped. Our instrument is coming along so well. I can do this all day. Okay, I think I want a little more release. Now, Kontakt has built-in effects, so let's throw reverb on it. You can use convolution if you have any impulse responses. I don't currently, but you can use plate reverb. And now, let's get more decay, because this is going to be so good. Let's get a little bit more reverb in it. And now, so pretty. So let's actually add effect, reverb, plate. I'm going to do the same with the last effect because I want to actually add a limiter. So let's go dynamic limiter, and then we can push the gain just a little bit more. This sounding a little bit healthier, you know what I mean? Another thing that I like to do is to add a filter and modulate that with my mod wheel. You can add a filter, let's go low pass, and you can use learn MIDI CC, and then you can modulate that this way, but it's full scale. So at its very minimum, it's going to be closed cutoff all the way, and then at the top, it's going to be open all the way. So alternatively, we can actually add effect in the group insert effects. And then we're going low pass, same one, but now we can modulate this with MIDI CC 1, and now we can actually decide how far it's going to modulate. So this is our starting point, right? This is how we set our starting point, and then this is how much it's going to open that filter. And so so useful, so easy to just add those and have this modulate our filter, get some more expression out of our instrument. So you can add more effects because Kontakt has some modulation effects as well. Stomps, amps, you can EQ it if you want. You can actually have more groups doing different things. You can use groups to do stuff like round robin, which is more elaborate to do, but a simple thing to do is actually add a release sample. So what we can do is duplicate this group, and then let's not edit all groups and call this release. Now let's solo this group real quick. And what we want to do is select by group when we're in the mapping editor. And then what we want to do is actually use this as a release trigger. And so let's uncheck note mono. And then if we double click, take our note start and drag this all the way to the end. And then obviously we want our attack to be as fast as possible and then have some release. So since this group, this release group is now soloed, so what we can do is hear that nothing happens when I actually trigger the sample, but when I release it, I'm getting the release sample. So we can do the same thing for each sample. Amazing. Now we can unsolo this. And let's just make sure that on the main group that is actually playing, we don't have now that much release. So we can take this down just a bit. And now... And we're using the same sample. We didn't actually record a dedicated release sample for that. This is so good. Why won't you do this? This is so fun to do. I mean, yes, it's a tedious process. Yes, it took a lot of time and a lot of effort, and it could get frustrating. But once you actually go through the first couple of instruments that you're actually making, the options are limitless. Honestly, I can't encourage you enough to try and do something like this. So let's just save our instrument because this is gold. I'm going to use this so much. So once we're happy with our instrument, or if you just want to give it a rest for the day, what we want to do in order to save this little floppy icon, #millennials, and then save edited instrument. And then what we want to select is patch plus samples, and then just choose a new folder. Let's do UKPad. I actually saved this already, but UKPad 2, for instance, and then UKPad version 2, save, can save all the samples, and then let's actually close this. And then let's go to, this is UKPad version 1, UKPad 2, version 2, drag this in. We're good to go. Oh, that release sample. Woo! That's so good. So this is how I like to make my instruments. And yes, I'm shooting this on a different day. Deal with it. This is how I like to make my instruments in Kontakt. Now, you do need to have the full version of Kontakt in order to make your own instruments. You can't use the free Kontakt player. And the full version of Kontakt costs, I think, $400, which is a lot of money for a sampler. But for the same price, you can get Complete 12 Ultimate, which gives you so many instruments in VSTFX plus the full version of Kontakt 6, and you can create your own instruments. So I actually think this is a really good investment, especially for beginners. If you can spend $400 for a huge bundle that gives you so many tools plus the ability to make your own instruments, yeah, I think this is a really good purchase. By the way, this video is not sponsored by Native Instruments. I wish I could be sponsored by them. I'm not. If you're still looking for ways to make your own instruments for free, there are methods of doing that. So if you're using Ableton Live, you can actually make an instrument rack and then have multiple samplers, one for each note, and map those in different key zones depending on the key range of the sample. I do find that the interface of doing that is a little uncomfortable compared to the Kontakt interface, but you still get a lot of the functionality that you get out of Kontakt. So the ability to loop the sample and get a really nice long sounding pad. You can still add as many effects as you want, map those to MIDI CCs, but it is possible, and then you end up still with a really nice sounding instrument. If you're using Logic, actually while filming this video, Logic came out with version 10.5, which features a new version of their EXS24 sampler that has a lot of cool features, and in the new version, super awesome features to create your own multi-sampled instrument. So for instance, you can drag multiple samples into the sampler and it will set everything up for you so you don't have to do that one by one in Kontakt, which is something that I wish that either I don't know of in Kontakt and it is a feature, or they're going to implement that in the next version because it's a super time saver. You are losing a few functionalities of Kontakt, like using release samples and having round robins and scripting and making your own interface, but honestly, this video is about showing you how easy it is to make your own instruments and get your own personality, your own playing style, your own passion and voice into your productions. So I hope I gave you some good ideas on how you can get your own voice stand out in your own productions and maybe got you excited creating your own instruments. If you do end up making your own instruments, please share an audio link, video link in the comments below. I would love to see what you guys came up with. And if you're looking for more inspiration for creating your own instruments, actually Spitfire Audio has a huge community of people sharing instruments that they created on a website called Piano Book. So I will have the link in the description below for that. If you like this video and you want want to see more, please consider subscribing because I'm going to post a lot more content here and on my Instagram, so make sure to follow me over there as well. And as always, stay creative, stay awesome. I'll see you in the next one.